Hey Raj, good morning.
Good morning, Dharmesh. How are you?
Doing very well. Welcome to our Fireside chat on Phonecast. And uh, for people who don't know, Alexander Group is a management consulting company, organization that basically works with a lot of senior leaders on the sales and marketing side of the house, helping them think through the go-to-market strategies. Raj, you'll probably have more context on what you do and what Alexander Group does. It'd be great for people to sort of understand and know more about that, and then we can move forward with that topic of the day, which is all about managing shifting priorities in the age of COVID.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thanks, Dharmesh. Yeah, as you mentioned, Rajran, I'm a manager with the Alexander Group. I've been with the company for around 4 years now, and I was in Boston and then San Francisco and now in Seattle. So really, I know you're in the East Side as well. So I don't know where some of our participants are. The Alexander Group, we are a management consulting company. We specialize in that we focus on revenue growth. We work with CROs, VPs of Sales, the HR partners on sales compensation, sales strategy, go-to-customer model, territory design, segmentation, etc. So there's a lot of work that we do, but almost all of it is related to revenue growth. So we primarily work with the CROs, and I personally have worked across tech, life sciences, manufacturing, a whole bunch of different industries, both within US and a lot of time in Asia as well.
Excellent. And you've been on both sides, right? You've been in management consulting, and before that, you were actually working in sales operations as well.
That's true. You're absolutely right. I worked at RealSelf. I was the director of revenue operations at RealSelf. We had a team there for RealSelf. For those of you who don't know, it's a company that's the best way to describe it is a Zillow or TripAdvisor of plastic surgery.
Excellent. Yeah. So today we'll talk about the impact on sellers' quota and pay. And before we get there, I think the couple of things that we want to make sure that we have is you talked about these three things, right? So business continuity, quotas and compensation, and growth reboot as we're preparing for this chat. So what exactly are you hearing on these things?
Yeah, definitely, Dharmesh. So I think the first thing we want to do is, right, what do you do now, right? I think what should CROs, operations teams, sellers, what should they be focused on in the immediate short term, right? This month, this week, next couple of months, right? What do you want to do right now to make sure that you survive, right? Before COVID takes a backseat and the business start to open and things start to quote unquote normalize. So that's like, what do you do business continuity wise immediately?
Okay.
As part of that, right, you have to think about quotas and compensation. And you may have two options, right? You want to think about what you do immediately, and we'll talk about some things that our customers are doing and what AGI is seeing. And then we'll also have to think about, well, more holistically, what do we do for second half? What do we do for 2021? And that's the post-COVID growth reboot. Like, how do you set yourself up for success in the second half, and how do you set yourself for success in the following year? So that's really what you want to do. And what we are seeing, right, the biggest, like this is consistent across every single company we are focused on right now, existing customer base. It's all about the existing customer base. I think it's really challenging to land new logos. Of course, there are some exceptions. I mean, if you think of companies like Zoom, Microsoft with Azure and like virtualization, VMware and Amazon, there's a lot of growth that those companies are seeing with new logos, as well as companies like make this sudden shift to people working remotely, etc. But by and large, if you exclude some of these companies, most companies are really focused on their existing customer base, and that's really driven by like, how do you keep them happy? You want to expand usage. You want to make sure they're using all the features of your product, and you want to make sure they renew, because I'm sure many of these contracts are coming up for renewal.
Oh yeah, I mean we've had the same experience, right? Even though we are really small, renewal has been a big focus for us, and touch wood, customers have renewed. But yes, the renewal expansion. So I can totally resonate with all those three things, right? Drive expansion, drive usage and look at making secure the renewal deals.
Yeah.
But on the new acquisition side, are you're still saying that we should still sort of figure out continue the business, but the focus then is on the retaining the customer?
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? I think it is hard to pivot a company. Like imagine you have hundreds of sellers, maybe even thousands of sellers, many of them really focused, right? Especially on a field sales team. Many of them are probably focused on landing new logos, right? There's this, if you think of a traditional SaaS company, it's all about land logo and expand, right? You have the land and expand model. The land piece is really critical. Like without the landing, there's really not much opportunity for expansion.
Correct.
But having said that, right now, in the next few weeks, next couple of months, it is really challenging, right? Like how are you going to get the mind share of someone who is brand new to your company, right? Like how do you get them to like say, oh yeah, I will commit to buying this new, like license a new piece of software. So that's really hard. So what we are seeing is companies are using creative ways to reallocate the field sellers' time. With that be additional training, right? Product training, there's training on technology, using them to maintain customer relationships, driving expansion. Basically, they're becoming a customer success manager in the short term.
That'll be interesting. Actually, we should spend some time on that one because traditionally people have like you said, that land and expand or the hunter farmer model. So in this new age, what are the hunters doing, right? And so are we reallocating hunters to become more farmers? I think that'll be a really interesting sort of look at that. And so this is some of the areas that you've kind of a little bit. This is really interesting that you have on the immediate focus slide.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we can. These are what companies should be doing, right? For immediate focus, like what should you be doing right now? So there are a whole bunch of things you could do in second half, and we'll talk about that. But right now, you really want to make sure your customers are using your software. Like in the past, if customers had a license for 3 years and if the adoption was slow, that's okay. That is not something you want to do right now. You have the spare capacity from your sellers and your customer success managers. You want to leverage this time to make sure your customers are starting to use your product, using more of it, adding more people on it, unlocking additional features, right? I think that's really, really critical. And you don't want to lose focus on that. I mean, even if renewal is some ways away.
Yeah, I think that's for enterprise startups, right? A lot of them onboarding does take time, right? And onboarding and getting people using takes time because of the change management and all that involved. So I think what you're saying is have a lot more focus on shortening those onboarding cycles and really driving more change management internally with stakeholders in the company to drive adoption and usage of the product itself. Which is something generally, right? You're so busy looking to hunt that you don't really spend a lot of time, after the deal is done. And now the challenge is really earning the right to earn the revenue on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, there's a tech company that we know, right? They had started to plan how to drive more adoption. Like what they do is they create a customer success plan. The salespeople will hand off a customer success plan to customer success managers. This is something that they build during the sales cycle with their buyers. So everyone is aware, like this is how we will drive the ROI. Like if you license our software, you will see these returns because of all these metrics. And they're religiously tracking those metrics. They create a report, almost like a white paper, and give it back to the CSM. Will create a white paper and give that back to the customer and say, well, here is what we thought you would have, and now this is what's happening, and here are some next steps. So it's almost like go ahead.
No, that's actually very interesting because we follow that as well, right? Like one of the things we do religiously at our end is we've got a customer success team join the pre-close meeting. And one of the things that we want to do with that is we want to reduce the translation gap it takes between sales and customer success, right?
Yeah.
And really drive around the entire revenue focus. Because your customer doesn't really care about your org charts. He's like, I'm buying something. I need something to get done. And so driving that alignment to me is like true revenue operations, right? Because revenue is now everybody's business, not just a sales guy locking the deal, right? You got to get the customer success guy. So I think those metrics would be super interesting to see what do they provide the before and after to drive ROI behavior. I think the most companies have not intentionally done that well, but I think that's a great area for people to invest in.
Yeah, and Dharmesh, you're absolutely right. That's one thing we are hearing over and over again is that everyone is now a customer success manager in your company. Marketing, product, salespeople, obviously CSMs, managers, like everyone is now a customer success manager because you really want your customers to be happy. And interesting, one of the things that we are seeing, companies are not turning off like the access to the software if the renewal expires. Right, they're giving customers a bit more leeway. So some of the practical things companies are doing, and this is easier with some of the enterprise customers because they have the cash flow to allow for like an extension without like worrying about immediate payment. So what they're doing is they're allowing the renewal to be pushed out for 3-4 months, giving customers that flexibility, not turning off any features. If the customers ask for additional features, they're turning them on without any charge. They want the customers to really use their software, really get embedded in their workflow, so that when the time comes, because it will move past this, the customers are happy about it and they will recoup the cost then.
Excellent. Cool. Okay, so moving forward, you talked about business continuity, and now I think the big part of it is once they have the business continuity, right? We have to start looking at options like just a minute here. Is it back?
Yeah, so one more thing I will say on the business continuity, right? I think in terms of this is interestingly what we're hearing in terms of sellers. Some of the sellers who were more relationship focused are struggling, as opposed to sellers who are more like execution, like I'm getting straight to the point and trying to sell. And I think part of that reason, this is a hypothesis, is that Zoom fatigue is starting to set in. And so at the start, everyone's like, okay, great. A month ago, Zoom was like relatively a novel feature for most people. They're like, great. But I think now, like seeing yourself on screen constantly over and over again, people are starting to get some fatigue, and that the small talk, which is more natural around the water cooler, is a little bit odd when you do that over Zoom. So what we're seeing is companies where sellers go directly to the point. Like, of course, they'll exchange pleasantries, but they go straight to the point, and being like very mindful of the other person's time, are seeing a lot more success than the traditional sellers who you think are more relationship focused and like the wine and dine and those kind of sellers. Who are
that's very interesting, because I was thinking about that, right? I think when we talked about last time, I was sharing this experience, like we're getting zoomed out. Back-to-back Zoom meetings, and you suddenly realize you could spend 10 hours on a computer watching a screen, that you actually want a real conversation. And if you have the farming mentality, yes, you want to invest in building a relationship. But what I'm also hearing is, even in that, get to the point, right? Get moving, respect the people's time, because they are actually managing not just work, but even home, right? Some people have got kids in school, and they're like trying to make sure the kids are studying and taking work. And so some of those small talk pleasantries do take a backseat. And
no, you're absolutely right on that one. We have clients, right, who are facing a lot of challenges where both partners are working, and what they'll do is they will figure out, they have a calendar, like, okay, you can be on a Zoom call while I watch the kid, and so on and so forth. And those are some of the tactics that people are starting to use, because there's no daycare, there's no school. It makes it really challenging for many of our peers who all have kids, or and they have dual people working.
And I think the empathy is more than just that empathy on the email. It's like really being respectful of the time when you're getting into the meetings, and really focusing on that. I didn't think of it that way, but that's something really interesting and thoughtful actually over there. And so these are some of the expansion metrics that you'd be talking about, the CSMs that have been tracking.
Yeah, exactly. So I think these are, again, very traditional metrics that you want to make sure there's good adoption in terms of number of users, make sure there's consumption of your product. Try to like sell them cross additional products within your portfolio, and you can do that. Like I think companies are giving that away almost for free or doing trial where all of those things existed in the past. It has taken on a completely different meaning now, where you really want to like embed in your customers' workflow, and so that it becomes second nature for them to use your product. So that's an interesting one. The new buyer is definitely challenging, but some companies are trying to do that. Telemetry is something, right, which was cool and interesting that many companies didn't necessarily always use, but it's becoming more and more important, right? I think you want real-time data so you can track usage, and then you can come up with mitigation plans. Like if we know customers who are tracking this religiously, and not just like product usage, but also if they conduct training, what they'll do is they will track usage of the joining the website, webinars, training, if they're coming to the website to download information. So there's a lot of different metrics that companies are tracking beyond telemetry to see success.
Okay. Excellent. So hunters are no longer just hunters. They have to go into farming mode, right? And so the entire shift in behavior is going to happen. So how do you think about compensation in quotas? Do you see a lot of companies adjusting quotas, or are they changing the comp models?
Yeah. If you ask me if there's one like silver bullet out there, there's none. I think there's a lot of opinions, a lot of like different things that people are trying. There isn't one solution out there. I think in general, right? If you look broadly, most companies have been impacted negatively. There's some exception. There's like I think in our surveys we see less than like 5-10% of companies who are actually seeing growth. But for the most part, most companies are seeing a decline relative to their forecast. So because of that, right, I think companies are trying to determine what is the right approach in terms of quota and comp. And you really have to think about a couple of different vectors. One is it that all of your sellers are seeing a decline, or is it like your sellers focused on oil and gas or hospitality or airlines? If your customer base has like a segmentation, and some of your sellers are focused more heavily on these segments that have been really who are really hurting, it is a different approach as opposed to like if all of your customers are hurting, that's a very different approach you would want to take. And it has implications in terms of territory design, quota, and comp, right? For example, if you are seeing some segments hurting, but other segments doing well within your portfolio, what you could do is reallocate some of the seller bandwidth, the sellers even, to better serve other segments where you're seeing growth. And so we can go into some of the details there, but let's start with two things, right? So AGI does virtual roundtables similar to what we are doing right now. So we've heard from over 100 CROs in that one. And then the other thing we do is we have been doing a lot of surveys. So we'll share some of those findings. Let's go through those findings first, and then we'll talk about some recommendations and in terms of what companies are doing. But these are like some high-level things that we've heard here.
Just one thing that I had in mind on this was: are you really seeing companies doing quarterly plans right now, or how they're thinking about quarterly planning?
Yeah. So what they're doing is they said, you know what? There's no way for me to predict what will happen 3 months from now. Forget like some people are like, I can't even predict what will happen next month or 2 months from now. We see this in the longitudinal study. Like we had the survey, we have 3 versions of the survey done starting in like March, April, and now early May. It's interesting, like when people thought things would go back to normal, many companies in the first survey thought, yep, by May, everything will be back to normal. Now, the number of I do not know is the majority opinion. Like the majority of the people do not know when they think things will go back to normal. Whereas in the first version of the survey, which was in March, many people, the majority of the people thought by May, everything will be back to normal. So I think having said that, because of that reason, companies are being very conservative and saying, you know what, let's move to a quarterly plan that gives us that flexibility to make sure we keep our good sellers, And if we start to see growth, we can change the plan and still maintain our compensation budget, hit our forecast, etc. But what are you seeing, Dharmesh? What are you seeing in
Yeah,
terms
so
of?
we've always believed that in terms of agility, uh, and the market is always changing, right? And so the companies that are really growing fast or rebalancing themselves, they are looking to build more agility in the process, which means they are uh, planning quarterly.
Yeah.
The process was not very well defined because anyway, for board reporting, they're giving that update like here is what it is. Uh, but we so our customers have always been planning quarterly, so every quarter for the next 18 months. But what I'd heard earlier from people was still largely we're okay with our annual planning cycle. So it's really interesting to see that people are now beginning to really appreciate the fact that quarterly planning is the way to go. And and I think this is my personal view, right? You have if you're doing the right things during difficult times, you will not have difficult times even when things become good, right? This quarterly planning is a good behavior to have, and continue to drive that, because if things are moving really fast, like we were talking to one prospect, and they were like, we're growing like crazy. So whatever quota number that we put out there right now, we don't know quarter from now, did we under promise and we over delivered, or can we do better? So should we put it up, because they're in a growth market, right? And contrary, right, if you're in a flat and changing dynamics like COVID, you have the other side, right? We don't know what's going to happen, so let's not put unrealistic goals out there, and let's be more conservative, and we'll fine tune.
Interesting. Dharmesh, with the customers who have moved to quarterly that you've seen, what has been the feedback from the sellers, right? I think one perspective we always hear from sellers, right, is their perception is if you move to quarterly, you will always be giving us higher and higher quotas based on like how things go, as opposed to if you give them an annual number, then like they can figure out like how they want to pace themselves. So what are you hearing from the
it's a mix of both. It's a mix of both. It depends on the deal size, right?
Okay.
So so like the older companies that we had, the legacy companies, right, where they're large deal sizes and they have a large enterprise agreements kind of notions, they take time to play out. They do not like quarterly shifting of the post itself. But quarterly fine tuning is always okay for them.
Sure.
So we're not changing the entire comp model, but we want to start tracking, at least in the mid-market space, if they have a large portfolio of accounts, which accounts, they're always anyway looking at what can I close this quarter. So the quarterly planning actually gives them a lot more focus, especially with the SaaS business, because the idea is to earn the dollar now, right? And so yes, you still have a number, you still have the accounts to focus on, right? I might fine tune your territory for more optimization. And if I'm going to change the quota number on you, that's okay. Then the comp model has to align with it as well, right? So I think quota and comp are two quite tightly integrated pieces, because essentially it's a reflection of the behavior that they want to drive. Right.
Interesting.
And we also see that like customers are moving, right? So they move from, say, they had an account, a prospect had an account in a in a mid market. Yes, usage has gone up. You're making more revenue out of that account. Now it's an enterprise account, right? And so the account has to move to the enterprise person anyways, right? And you're shifting ownership, you're shifting. Also, all those things have to come in, and you can't wait for the year to end, right? You just got to make sure that the customers are served right.
Yeah. No, you're right. I think the flexibility is really valuable. I think what we see, and that works well with companies that have a robust operations team, right? I think you need either you need the manpower, you throw a lot of bodies at it, or you have a really good solution, a software solution that does that for you.
That's our thing. Like we automate, but to be honest, a lot of it is driven through culture as well, right? So what works for us is sales leaders are telling us that we hire people and we tell them this is your plan for the quarter, and next quarter things will change. And so I think that cultural nuance balances, and of course, yes, you need automation, you need all the tools available, because planning is painful. It takes a while to plan, but it's not just the plan part. that stops them. It's how do you take that plan and make it executable, right? That you have to now depend on IT and also, so essentially, if you can automate the end-to-end cycle, you can become really agile.
No, you're absolutely right. So I can tell you so many stories from clients where in a regular time, not talking now, like in a traditional cycle, assuming that January 1st is start of their new fiscal year, I have had clients, it's March 15th, and the reps still don't have their quota for the year. Yeah. So 3 months almost in.
3 months.
And then
we've experienced that as well, and I'm stunned how lax they are, because legally you're supposed to make sure that they have quota, right? On the starting day, you're bound to it. But yeah, I think it's because it's such a manual process today.
Yeah, exactly. So then in that scenario, it's really hard for companies like that to move to quarterly. They can barely manage the annual cycle. Yeah. So
absolutely. Yeah. So these are some of the findings that you talked about.
Perfect. Yeah. So as I mentioned, we do these. We have been doing more of these surveys. But yeah, no surprises here, right? I think most companies, 90%, expect to have a negative impact on both seller pay and revenue. Obviously, they're interlinked. And then most companies, 78%, and this probably has risen up in the past few days. They are starting to adjust sellers' pay, and there are some very specific things that you can do, which we'll share shortly. And
let's look at that.
Yeah, exactly. So we can dive into that one, right? I think it's like, how do you change the incentive pay? Like, how do you do it? I think they just I think 71% expect to have a medium to high impact. Yeah, so very few. Like if you look at the positive impact, what is that? 2%.
Very 2%. Yeah, no minimal impact. It's like hardly anybody. Everybody's getting impacted.
Everybody's getting impacted,
and they're all making near-term adjustments and shortening the duration of changes.
Exactly.
They're all experiencing a spike. They're not experiencing a spike in sales revenue, which is kind of.
And it's all short-term changes. I think companies are looking like in the short run, right? What do I do now to make sure my sellers don't it's not like they're worried about them leaving today, but they know that any negative changes today will leave a bad taste in their mouth. That when the economy does pick back up, your top sellers are the one who are going to leave when they get good opportunities.
That's an important part for them to sort of keep in mind.
Yeah.
And so they are considering quota relief.
Quota relief is one thing that they are doing, at least in the short run. Like, what can we do in terms of the quota? Can we scale back their quota? Can we, in terms of the comp changes, right? They go together in terms of quota and comp. One is, can we scale back their quota? Give them a couple of things we're seeing. Give them 1.5x credit, right? So we still want them. If you just reduce the quota, then the sellers have less impetus to go out and sell. They have less motivation. So they still want sellers to be motivated. So what can we do to do that, right? You can take away the threshold. If let's say you had a hard threshold or any sort of threshold, that's it. You gotta hit 80% of your target before you start earning dollars. Now companies are like, let's take away the threshold so that you start earning incentive dollars from your first dollar of license. Alternatively, we'll say we'll give you 1.5x credit. If you bring in $100, we'll give you 1.5x credit, right? I think those are ways that you can really drive sellers to be motivated to keep selling, even in this really challenging environment.
So here we see all these three aligned, right? Territory, quota, and comp.
Yeah.
And then so let's walk through this one, because this is really interesting, because I think this is passion. This goes back to the heart of the quarterly planning cycle that we talked about, right?
Yeah.
You're always maintaining territories, quota optimization, and comp plan alignment.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think so. This one is like, there is a lot here, and it's not always easy for companies to pull this off in the very short run. What we're starting to see is companies are starting to decide, well, Q2 was a challenge. There's not much we could have done, but what do we do in Q3, right? There's still some time before Q3 and Q4 start. It looks like things will get better. It looks like things will go back to a little bit of a normal state. Like, what do we do to be successful there? It's unlikely, even in a normal scenario, that hospitality is going to get back to normal anytime soon. It is unlikely that airline industry is going to get back to normal anytime soon. So, like, what do we do in that scenario? So you start with the territory rebalancing, right? You want to make sure that you have enough bandwidth on tech, and then particular areas of healthcare. Like, where are some growth opportunities? You want to almost segment your customers and figure out what are the micro segments that will be successful, and drive sales towards that. I think that really you want to understand where are your top potential customers, and then once you have that, do the rest of this.
So the old model of just segmenting, like traditionally people will take a geo-based lens or employee size-based lens. That doesn't cut it anymore, right? You have to get into hyper-segmentation by verticals, right? And go into that mode. And I think it'll be a forcing function for a lot of companies that have never actually built a vertical playbook.
Yeah.
Right. To start really thinking about what's a value proposition that they bring to that given vertical, and which verticals they should be targeting. And I think that'll bleed into your to the training piece as well, because some of the hunters may not know the language of a given vertical. Right.
And that's always a challenge. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think if you are a seller who's based in Houston or something, and you've been really focused on oil and gas, it's really hard to then all of a sudden pivot and start selling in the tech field. So that's always a challenge. But I think what companies are doing is they're using this Q2 to train these sellers, right? Because you have to do something. I mean, it's not like hospitality and travel is going to come back anytime soon. So you want to make sure that these resources are leveraged effectively. So you could, give them additional training, etc., and then expand their territory, give them new prospects, give them a little bit of a leeway, like maybe they have a smaller quota, right? I think you have to work, you almost have to figure out on an individual by individual basis.
It's almost like it's a reset in some ways. Like you give them you're kind of giving them a new territory, or at least a micro segment of a territory.
Correct.
And if they're learning something new, you have to really start assuming that they're going to start ramping again. And so, it's my ramp. It may not be the full ramp, because he knows the product, but at least there's some ramp involved. And so you'll try the quota optimization to those activities as well, right?
Exactly. And that goes right into the quota optimization, right? Because you are seeing some growth. Companies are seeing growth, and they will see significant growth in Q3, Q4, right? I think this continued work from home. If you look at Amazon, Microsoft, Google, I think like pretty much all the big tech companies have decided to extend the work from home through most of 2020. Right? Either optional.
In fact, in this environment of uncertainty, that's the uncertainty they've put in place. Yes, you can work from home, right? And so people will get used to it. They'll sort of figure out a system that works, right? Till now, nobody wanted to make long-term arrangements for alternate, systems, because you don't know that I'm back in the office next month. Or it's going to be 6 months. At least give me some certainty, and we can plan around those things.
Yeah.
And so what are you seeing some of the things on comp plan alignment? Like, what are some of the best practices that you've noticed?
Yeah. So I think for comp plan, you have to figure out the immediate changes you would want to make for Q2, Q3 are like, you want to take away, like, as I mentioned, the threshold is literally one of the biggest things, right? You don't want sellers to be demotivated, right? If you have you still want to give them a robust quota. You don't want to make it easy. I think the last thing you want to do is just have a plan.
Are you seeing comp plans being shifted to include activities that are traditionally not sales activities?
That's interesting. So I will say there is a mixed feedback on that one. So companies are not incenting on activity-based metrics. So it's rare. It's not that some companies are doing it, but it's rare for companies to incent or tie sales incentive compensation on activity-based metrics, with the exception of, let's say you have a short contest or a spiff or something that you do in the short run. So in the short run, you could have like, hey, if you conduct these meetings, you will get like $100 or something, right? If these are key accounts. So that's what companies are doing. But companies are not wholesale changing plans to incent on activities. I mean, it's not something we would recommend as well.
Okay.
But what I will say, having said that, is you do want to track those, right? I think at least in the short run, you want to track the activity metrics. We've heard from customers who have recently licensed people.ai, for example, right? I think they want to use tools that will allow them to track activities and determine what's successful. I think if I think of all the tools that I've heard on recent calls, Gong.io, right, which allows you to listen back to the conversations and like coach your sellers. So that's one that we've heard consistently.
Okay.
Outreach, that's something that we've also heard consistently about. Like that's all activity based, right? So you use that. And so I think, and people.ai, again, it's all activity based. So companies are using them to coach and train their sellers, but not to incent sellers. So I think I want to draw that distinction. Well, are you seeing anything differently?
No, I'm not seeing anything. It's just like my intuition of like how would we incent, right? Because the compensation has to change.
Yeah.
Right. Compensation drives behavior, and if we were to go back earlier, right, if a lot of them are going to focus on current customers, find use cases, find adoptions, right, expansion opportunities, then you have to incent them for those activities as well.
Correct.
Right, and give them comp credit for those activities. Traditionally, we give CSM those things, so renewal falls in the CSM bucket. Right now, is the account manager getting in or AE getting it? Like so in the absence that you don't want a conflicted ownership. So CSMs are stepping up, and you can't make all AEs in mass turn into CSMs as well. So they still have to do nurturing work, and they still have to hunt for new deals. And in my mind, there's got to be some level of activity based compensation that needs to kick in to drive the right behavior.
Yeah.
But I can also see that there is a fine line, because people can very well start putting a whole lot of meetings and showing activity, but actually not turning into reasonable behavior, right? So we have to monitor it to see effectiveness. But I think the biggest part is, are we rewarding them for activity, or are we rewarding them for impact?
Yeah.
And so
the outcome.
how are we, so what kind of impacts do you want to drive is something that we have to be thoughtful about. And I would actually go back in my mind to those key metrics, right? Are you, even in a current customer, are you doing new business upsells? Are you finding net new contacts and building a relationship with them? Because those for me are impact.
Exactly. No, I think you're absolutely right, Dharmesh. I think we always especially as at AGI started as a sales compensation focused management consulting company, and so I think it would be blasphemous for us to say incent on activities. But I think you're absolutely right in that you could still incent on non-revenue outcomes, right?
Exactly.
For example, driving usage.
Yeah, because you know for a fact that they're not going to be able to close deals, right? They're lucky to get meetings with new prospects, or at least the existing prospect, they're going to need to get meetings, and for that you need to do certain activities. So I think you have to factor in that for the incentive compensation. Historically, we've not done it, yes, for good reasons, because you were like, we are sales, it's all about outcomes, but we are not in normal times, right? And so you got to sort of figure that out.
Yeah. And cool. I think the next slide has that, if you, I think we have some of the solutions for sales compensation, right? I think
this is interesting. Let's spend some time on this. This is really interesting to me.
It is, so again, there's a lot to unpack here, right? I think it depends on how much disruption you're seeing as a company, right? I think, are you seeing revenue? Like, how long do you think that will last, et cetera, right? Same thing with company dynamics. It's interesting if you have a lot of seasonality built into your sales cycle, right? If let's say you get most of your sales in the second half, then you may be okay not doing anything right now, right? If your seasonality implies that you're not getting much in Q1, Q2, then you really shouldn't make too many changes. So that also plays a big role. If you've had rationalization of your sales force, or if you reduce workforce, that allows that there's enough now opportunity for each of the remaining seller, that has some impact as well. So those are some of the things you have to keep in mind as you think about how your sales compensation changes. And then the easy ones, right? You can decrease quota, you can set new quotas, etc. Companies are doing, at least in Q2 for this quarter, they are using more of some sort of guarantee. Like if you hit certain metrics, you'll get your pay, because they do want to keep some of your top sellers, so they don't want to lose them. The one thing that we have seen less of the under 5 solution options, right? Quota performance changes, index performance, or stack rank. We're not seeing much of that because in normal times you may, even if you're a hyper competitive company, that may be okay. But in this environment, that's not good for the morale. So it's not something we're seeing where you're stack ranking the performance of your salespeople. If the opposite of what companies are doing is they're just touting all the wins, they're getting excited about it. They'll send like a company-wide Slack or email about the big wins, but they're not doing the typical stack ranking of sellers because that's just it's not it will in this time that it will just lead to a loss of morale.
Yeah, it doesn't drive the right behavior. I completely agree with you. I think that's one of the things that we've seen is it goes back to the empathy, right? Even our sellers, right? They're going through trying times, right? It's not that they're not lack of trying, it's that the market is different. And so now at this point, if you have those seller scorecards of the top of it's really not creating a healthy working environment. And so I think it's a good one. Plan design changes. Like how are you seeing your company, your customers roll out new plan design changes? Are they from a frequency perspective, right? Are they doing it to your earlier point? Are we doing quarterly planning? Are they now creating a plan for a quarter and pushing those things out, or how are they communicating those design changes? Because sellers are sensitive to that.
Sure, definitely. No, you're absolutely right. I think there's two things that companies are doing right now. One, they are taking a very short-term approach to Q2, right? Let's stop the bleeding and let's figure out what we want to do for Q2. And they're communicating this is only a Q2 change. Then they're saying, okay, well, right now companies are planning, well, what do we do for Q3, Q4, right? There is, based on everything everyone's hearing, there is a general sense or expectation that things will start to normalize, at least in quite a few segments, if not all the segments. So they are starting to communicate that, hey, our goal, even though it's a quarterly plan, our goal is to keep this for the next couple of quarters for the second half. Like, what can we do to drive success in the second half? Let's try to recover as much as we lost in the first half in the second half. So those are some of the things that they are communicating. They are creating plans for the second half. And then, of course, there'll be a new plan in 2021 that may presume going back to normalcy.
Yeah, I think this will be the first new year that people will be happy saying goodbye to 2022. They're still celebrating to welcome 2021. But that's one of those things.
But I think one of the things that Dharmesh, you're talking, right, the shortening the performance period, right? I think they want to. That's something that works well. Companies are using a lot more spiffs and contests. They have. It's unlikely they'll blow out their compensation budget. So, and that's something we are seeing companies. They don't want, and this is something we are recommending as well. Don't think of your comp budget as something you can cut down cost on. Just make sure that you use that effectively and drive the right behavior and keep the salespeople you want. Part of that is run more contests, right? I think people love to have these short wins. Salespeople in the end are coin operated. You want to give them that excitement of a win here and there. So use a combination of contests, updated comp plans for second half.
So as I'm looking at this, right, there's a lot of work to be done every quarter: territory, quota, comp, carving, and of course, managing all those changes that happen through the year, right? Moves, add changes. How are you seeing people deal with it in your customer base? Is it Excel spreadsheets and just throwing bodies at it right now?
I think we've seen a combination of that, right? I think we are seeing some Excel. I think some of the bigger companies have big enterprise solutions, and then of course there's a forecast if you are. Right?
We are still very small. We're growing. So that's one of the things that it's intriguing for me because that's why we set it up. But I think there's a lot for us to do here.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a combination of people Excel, right? For the short term Excel, but long term it's not sustainable, right? You cannot.
Yeah, I'm looking at this as also an opportunity for really driving digital transformation of, so we talked about Gong, people, and outreach, right? So they have helped you scale the front end of the funnel.
Yeah.
But there's a whole stuff at the back end, which managers and salespeople and CROs are struggling with, is managing the moves that changes, the coverage of people, who's covering what, right? We're spending a lot of time on incentive comp tracking itself.
Yeah.
Right? I think this is the time to sort of really start thinking, if at least what we've seen in the growth companies is they're really looking at how do we automate the back office.
Yeah, definitely.
So this is a post-COVID growth. This goes back to the same thing we talked about, account prioritization.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by ops enablement over here?
Yeah, I think this one is key, right? You want to make sure under your sales, the sales ops or the revenue operations is going to be really critical going forward. Exactly to your point, right? You want to bring in as many tools, drive automation, because the old way of Excel based is not going to cut it anymore. Right? I think the idea is that if you want to cut territories faster, if you want to segment accounts faster, you want to identify the micro segments you want to target, all of that requires a really robust revenue operations team that has the right tools and skill set, right? So I think that's exactly what we mean. Like, you really want a modern revenue operations team that is a partner with sales, and it's not just supporting sales team. I think that's what we mean by the ops enablement.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we know Q1, Q2 is done, Q3. So there's, as you talk about Reboot, the specific things that we can do now for Q3, Q4.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what we want to do, right? I think you want to less disruption the better. So if you want to make changes for second half, right, make sure you make those changes. Think of changes that will likely sustain for the second half.
Yep.
The last thing you want to do is roll out some change for Q3 and then say make dramatic changes for Q4. You may still want to tweak a few things, but you want to have some sort of continuity. Exactly as you said, the reps don't like too much changing.
Yeah, I think Q2 has to be treated as end of the fiscal year and starting of the new sales calendar.
Exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. And this is some of the stuff that you guys do when you focused on at Alexander.
Yeah, so this is what we have is every couple of years, every year or so, we'll do a big study. We do a research study. We work with a lot of companies. So if any of you are interested, right, I know, Dharmesh, I think we would love to have you and all the attendees on this. Like, if you're interested, reach out to me, and then we'll get you in the study. It's the participation is free. You have to submit some data, and which is anonymized as part of the study. And we'll do an interview with one of your leaders, and we will then have a readout with you. So there'll be a particular readout with each of the participants that tells you what are the trends in the SaaS industry. Give you key ratios, right? We'll give you ratios on sellers to SCs, sellers to CSMs. What is the typical spend ratios, etc. So a whole bunch of metrics, over 30 metrics, along with some key insights.
I think this is something it's very valuable, actually. This is essentially most people struggle with, is when they're planning, like, how am I doing with it compared to my peers, and those metrics actually matter quite a bit.
Yeah.
So click back, but so this is how you do it, right? You run interviews, data collection, analyze, and then we'll have a briefing which we do on a regular basis. Well, looking at the time, I think we're just 3 minutes over, but excellent discussion, Raj. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and I think we look forward to sort of partnering with you as needed, in really driving some of those things that we talked about, right? The transformation of the back office.
Perfect. Yeah, Dharmesh. Yeah, it was great. It was great talking to you. Thanks for inviting us on, and we look forward to continue to work with you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Take care. Bye.
Bye.